These days with ChatGPT, you could take the job description, say, what questions would I be asked based on this job description? And then you could essentially prepare answers for those questions. There's no doubt that you can be there. But what you don't want to do is be a robot when you're answering the questions, right? So there is some concern that you're just going to ramble off something that you memorize. So it's not about that. It's just about building a catalog of stories that you can go back to. So when you do get asked questions, there's all these different challenges or problems or situations that you can go back and share in a very natural way.
Hi, and welcome to the TD Meetup. My name is Alexander Richter. I'm a technical director for visual effects, animation, and games, and I work at companies like Weta FX and Framestore on Avatar: The Way of Water and Monsters at Work. Hello everyone, welcome to the TD Meetup. My name is Alexander Richter, and today we want to talk about interviews and technical interviews, especially in visual effects, animation, and games. And the main point of this whole conversation, it will be a panel, and I'll be joined by Jimmy and Iva, is to figure out a way into one of the most important parts of the job searching elements. Besides application and negotiation, in the middle we have the interview, and that's always a big and important element because a lot of people either fail on that part or are nervous in that part or just feel like they're not really presenting themselves in the best possible light. And that's what we want to talk today, basically, with the caveat, because this is also a TD Meetup, we also want to specialize to some degree in the technical area. So we also cover the technical part and see how this is maybe different to a normal interview, for example. So this like TD Meetup is especially for both interesting for generally people who are interested in interviews and want to learn more about that, and then the technical interview specific part if you are a technical artist, technical director, or software developer. And this will be more of a panel, so we do it a little bit different this time. It is a meetup, so I want it to be more conversational. And I'm not alone today, as basically always now. I'm joined by Jimmy Ockley, who is a recruiter, supervising recruiter for more than 15 years. He was working at Animator, Image Engine Design, Blackbird Interactive, and now at Bardel Entertainment. And we did actually a 21 Artist Show episode recruiting while he was at Animator and talked about that one. So I highly recommend you to watch this one. There's also a lot of insights into the recruiting process, basically seeing a little bit the perspective of a recruiter, which often helps us who are on the other side to understand a little bit how things are going, basically. And the other person that are joining basically our panel today is Iva. She is also at Bardel Entertainment, and she's a recruiter there, and she also is more like focused on the technical side. So we basically can create this like free elements of like the free sides of an interview, basically, where Jimmy is the more of the supervising general recruitment part, Iva is the more technical recruiting part, and I'm on the opposite side of, like, trying to get recruited and also coaching that. So I also share my insights of how it allows me to work at companies like Framestore, Weta FX, and so on, basically.
We all know that it's been a pretty rough couple of years in our industry with the strikes and such. So it's made, I guess, a lot more competition in our market. And so when you're now looking at applying for jobs, there's a sense that you're competing with a lot more people, and that puts a lot more pressure on the individual. And I guess one thing I just noticed was I'm talking to some very competent and experienced people, yet there's still a sense of nervousness, and I'm attributing that to the market, versus if it was the opposite, there's not as much competition, it sort of relieves a lot of that pressure that someone can have going in and interviewing, knowing that maybe you're one of a few versus one of 100.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big influence every time. Is like, if you feel more pressure. Like, for example, a very typical thing is I need this job kind of situation. When you go into an interview and you have this, either because it's like, oh, it's Pixar, or it's whatever, it's like this high kind of stake situation. Like I remember when I had it when I was interviewing for WetaFX, and I was like, and it's also because you are, to some degree, you don't feel ready for it. Maybe, maybe it's like, I don't know how I came to that interview, please, kind of situation. That's one part. And I think the other part is like, you need this job, like, you're currently unemployed or whatever. And you go into an interview and have this like pressure of, I need to be successful. And I think there's maybe too much pressure sometimes of like, like in school, like this is an exam, I have to deliver, like I have to do 100% kind of thing. And I think that is not how the interview basically a little bit works. But let's start from the beginning. Like let's do a few both basically. Iva, so what about you? Like in terms of recruiting and stuff like that, did you always wanted to become a recruiter? Was that your dream when you were like 7 years old? That was like recruiting. Like that's what I want to be basically.
Do 7-year-olds know what a recruiter is? I'm just thinking. No, I actually wanted to be a diplomat. I really see myself or saw myself working for an NGO or one of those global governmental institutions and being a part of a negotiating team. In college, I volunteered a lot working for local refugee centers and big corporations like Mercy Corps. And I even volunteered at a congressman's office down in the States. But then I realized that the nonprofit government pace of doing things was not really, did not match my personality pace, as I tend to run quite idle high. So I transitioned into the digital media education space. And from there, the buzz around Unreal was picking up at the time. So I was very, very interested in games, animation, and the VFX industries. And it ended up joining a studio that was using Unreal as their main pipeline tool. And the few years later, I now work at Bardel, which specializes in 2D and 3D animation, and recruit for all kinds of roles. But the technical ones are the ones that I enjoy the most. I tend to always volunteer and be drawn to those. And I get to meet really, really smart left brain people.
Like, I want to work with the nerds. Like, only give me the nerds.
I love the nerds. I love the nerds. But they're also in this industry so creative. Everyone has kind of like a secret hobby. So I really enjoy that part.
Okay.
So in a short answer, no, I didn't.
What about you, Jimmy?
Well, for me, it was certainly a journey from being an artist. I always wanted to be an artist, so that was my goal. So I went to art school, graduated and landed my first job as an animator. At that time, there wasn't a lot of studios here in Vancouver, and we'd hit a big layoff at the studio, similar to what we've been experiencing. And so I didn't have many options at the time, so I started teaching at a local school, and just started to really enjoy the interaction and business side of the school, and making it a great place for students, which was an experience I had at the school I attended. And that just led me back to school to study business management, particularly with the HR focus. And when I graduated, sort of wanted to mold those two together and recruitment was where I ended up.
Awesome. So, I mean, the big question I think that we should answer before we dive into some details is like, what is the focus of an interview? What would you two say is basically the quickest sense? Because I feel like a lot of people come into an interview, and I think it's the same of exam in school. And I think there is this hacking thing where you can do. There are people who go in exam and feel like it's this mystical thing where you try to learn everything that was covered during the school year, and then you jump in and then you're surprised. And there are people who are like, they're just like learning the thing that they calculate will happen in the exam, and so they kind of pass through. And so there's like some people have like a different sense of what interview is, and I think most people I feel have always this like mystical thing of perfect situation, perfect score, you are the best person of yourself, like a date a little bit, and so on. So how would you two say what is the focus of every interview? What is the purpose basically?
Should I start?
Iva, yeah. Like, let's start with you.
I'd say the resume and the reel shows what you can do, and the interview is to show who you are, and they're kind of an integral part of each other. So in the interview, we want to evaluate the candidate's overall suitability for the role, evaluate their background, what they can do, and then at the same time, the soft skills, the cultural fit, and their motivation, what their goals are. So it's a little bit of everything. And this could happen in one call or over 3 calls, or sometimes even more. But essentially, that's the goal, to get to know what you can do and who you are.
Jimmy?
Yeah, and every supervisor is different. They may go into an interview with a specific objective, but for the most part, Iva's ticked that off, right? It's about having a conversation and getting to know the individual, and then confirming what you've said is true. So as you've sort of laid out things on your resume, we want to get that confirmation that information is correct. And so there is, in some ways, a test of knowledge, I guess you could call it.
So it reminds me like a kind of crime investigation when they put like the light into your face and say like, was that true? Did you say that correctly, basically? But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's a little bit like, because at the end of the day, what you put in your showreel or resume, like, it's just paper and a video. Like, you can put whatever you want in there. You can put I'm the president of the United States in there. Like, that's there. You don't have to prove that usually, or to some degree not. So yeah, I think that's actually a good point of to saying like, hey, by talking to you, we can also feel if what we saw and what we read is correct, basically about you. And I think that is also what is so important about it, like a conversation. And also that's something where I see the more experience of an interview you have, like, a senior meeting, like, coming to a studio interview. I also always feel like the senior interviews are more about like more fun and more about like day-to-day stuff. You talk about the movie that you just watched or the game that you just played, or you know what I mean? Like, you come into an interview and often I talk about like, oh, did you saw the latest season of, I don't know, Star Wars or whatever, and then basically it's like this kind of thing, and you like 50% of the interview you talk about random stuff, basically, sometimes, because I think there is a little bit of this less about the skill and the proof. It's more about like, how you kind of hold a conversation and stuff like that, basically.
100% agree. You've already almost proven your track record. Like you've worked at Weta, that's prestigious. You've worked at, let's say, Framestore. You have the work with big names to show. And it's just more learning about who you are. How are you going to fit on the team? Can I work with you 8 hours a day? Can I, potentially get a drink with you after work? It's that kind of conversation I've noticed also with senior and above.
Yeah, it means also that the recruiter will often like shift what's important for them depending on the situation. So if they feel like it's more about validation, then they will ask more this kind of like content question. If they feel more it's about connection and, team spirit, then they will maybe like ask more of this like kind of how you are interacting, or they will ask questions that will show more of the personality. So we also want to talk about the difference to technical interviews, basically. Let's start with you, Jimmy. What would you say is the difference between like a more technical interview and just a more of an artistic interview? How would you prepare them differently, basically?
Well, certainly, one is more about the craft, right? And the other is about specific skills within the technical side. So if you're responsible for troubleshooting or building a tool on the technical side, they're going to get into more of those examples, like how did you build the tool? What are some problems that you encountered? And on the creative side, they're just really more interested in your interaction with say the artists or how comfortable you are in Maya, for example. So it's just really a shift of focus, whether it's more towards the creatives and that would be, for example, if it's a animation, it would be with the animation supervisor, or if it's on the technical side, it could be with someone from the pipeline team, like a pipeline lead who's digging more into that side of the craft.
In a technical interview, you need to be very, very familiar with the tools that are mentioned in the job description. You need to be able to prepare to discuss specific, pipeline improvements or tools or systems that you've developed. You need to demonstrate really your problem solving skills, where I'd say in a more artistic or artist role interview, you'd focus on the creativity, how you express ideas. It's about the storytelling. It's about, sometimes they would even screen share a reel and go shot by shot, how you went about, making that creative decision. Yeah, I'd say it's a little more the logical thinking, problem solving versus the creativity and the execution of ideas and taking creative direction.
From my side, I feel like you are discussing more about the work itself. Like, for example, if you are like, I'm also like a lighting artist and a TD. So if I apply for a lighting artist job, it's more likely that we maybe open a show reel or some shots and we look at that and we talk about that, where I've never had opening my GitHub account and looking at my code and saying, hey, this looks pretty. This is a sexy code. How did you name this? Why did you name this function like this? And I remember actually a good example. It was when I was applying for the Film Academy as a technical director role. And you had like a free day. You had to create a ray tracer. So basically a rendering engine from scratch. And you had to write it in 3 days and nights. And when it came to the interview part of this, it was literally, I was prepared to, explain all the intricacies and the physics of calculating the light, bouncing off the shader, going back to the camera and stuff like that. And they asked me only one question during the interview. And that's also my experience in general. They only asked me, what light did you use in your kind of solution? It's like a point light, and that's it. And then we moved on. And I remember I was so super disappointed because I was like, I had this whole thing prepared and I wanted to talk about it, but they literally they looked at the code, they said okay, and maybe there was a little bit of making sure that I wrote the code myself by poking a little bit about that and making sure that I understand throughout the rest of the conversation that I'm experienced enough, basically. But it was always and I think that is a big difference between the two interview styles at the end of the day, because I feel like In technical interviews, besides a few common phrases, it's less about looking at particular like code or something. It's more about the whole workflow around it, where I feel like in artistic interviews, you literally sometimes just open the result, like the video or the picture or whatever, and then like literally look and explain directly things, where I feel like in like technical interview, it's a little bit more abstract. It's a little bit more explaining your ideas and process. Obviously, if you're not particularly coding something or whatever, basically. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about this topic and ultimately, you know, it comes down to, you know, what makes a good TD, for example, and you know, if you think about, if you have someone that's a really top-notch coder and they can build all these tools, but if the tools are not usable, you know, what value does that bring to the team, right? If they're not listening to the artist's opinions and they're just building what they think should be used. And so I think as we think about what makes a good TD, you're going to get a sense of the types of questions that are going to get asked in an interview, and certainly collaboration is going to be one of them. So you got to make sure that that's as you're preparing for these types of questions, have that in your mind. You know, what do I think a good TD is?
Actually, I always say, like, because sometimes people ask me, like, should they go like normal TD, pipeline TD, or like software programmer, researcher kind of? And I always kind of say, depends how social you are, basically. Like, you know, if you go into the research section, you're basically more isolated. You do your work for multiple weeks, months, sometimes years, and sometimes you don't really interact that much comparably, whereas as a like pipeline TD also, it's like a 50-50 more, where a normal TD is constantly like feedbacking, like, I wrote this tool for you, is that okay? Is the button correct? Does it do exactly what you need? So it's where the software developer still develops for a user, but it's more about the algorithm. It's not about the usability. It's more about the process. The render is 10% faster and stuff like that. Where the button is, who cares? Where the other one is exactly the opposite. They develop tools for the end user or the artist. And so it's all about like explaining to people and understanding people and being willing to, you know, just like pop over and say, hey, I just get the tool out. What do you think? Everything's fine, you know, things like that. So I think it's a little bit like this concept is also a little bit what kind of type you are, kind of changes a little bit which role probably is also better for you. And I think TD is a little bit this half social, half technical, like kind of position, more than pipeline TD and more than like a researcher, programmer, whatever, basically, because it is more isolating job, to be honest, like if I see that.
Yeah, and so that's going to gauge the types of questions that are going to be asked, right? Specifically in making sure that the individuals are good fits for that role.
That actually happened to me at Weta, because I had the conversation, I had a first interview, and they basically gave me a second interview with another department because they found out I'm more social than they expected. And so they basically gave me over to another department as well. Because and it's like, okay, because they were like, oh, we know that they are looking for a more social person in that for their team, basically. And I was like, okay, but yeah, that actually I barely remembered it. I just reminded me of that, because yeah, it actually happens, because you define your goals and you define the attributes that are more important for like certain teams, basically. And sometimes I feel like in the bigger companies or some companies, they try to build a team a little bit, like, you know, even if you have pure programmers, you need like a more, maybe like, you know, more social person, a more, you know, the coding wizard in there who's like, you know, the magic is flowing everywhere. I think that's the important part. I have here a few questions. I think that we can just jump into one of them. I think that works well here. So from Anonymous, for tech interviews for a senior role, say with 5 to 6 year experience, who worked at a startup, what are the things you look for, since the experience at a startup is very different from the big company titles? Thank you.
Experience at a startup. Are we talking startup in the VFX animation industry or something else?
I guess probably, yes. I think it's probably like I hope like whoever wrote the question, because I don't have a name, can correct us if it's different. But let's say it is visual effects company.
Of course, checking off all of the technical abilities, and a startup with this person as a senior, I'm assuming not a leadership position. Could they work well in a team? What are their collaboration skills? How they fit in? Have they played? I don't know. I'm just thinking, have they done anything that's team oriented? Have they always worked for themselves? Have they worked for a company before? All of these, I feel like, are going to make a
so you're
difference.
Focusing more on the size a little bit, because like you feel like a startup usually is very small. It's probably like, I don't know, 5-10 people, and your focus will be okay. Obviously you will see the skill in the show reel and the resume and whatever, basically, but then you are more conscious about, okay, are this person able to adapt to our like 100 people team size with bigger environment and more complex workflows? Basically, that will be your big focus, basically, on like in this situation.
My thing would be making sure that person can work for a company. Some people are not built to work for someone else. They're built to work for themselves. They're built to do their own thing. And maybe sometimes the need drives them to go and pick up an employee job, but that's rarely the right fit. I know many developers that way that have always worked for themselves, and then they contract with clients. They go from they're very project based. They deliver, but can they work with other people on a daily basis for 8 to 10 hours a day? It's not for everyone. So that would be my big concern. I think the technical part is really easy to verify, to check off, but it's that collaborative thing, because for companies, it's really expensive to hire. You go through this whole process, you have teams involved, you have the onboarding, then you have the probation period. And if it's not a good fit, it's really a waste of time and resources for everyone. So we want to make sure that we get the right person on the first try. Some of these roles are also not contract-based roles. They're staff roles, they're permanent roles. We show commitment by offering these big contracts. We show the plan for the company, and specifically in pipeline roles, for 2 to 3 years, 5 years, the studio plans. So if it's not the right fit from the very beginning, we should be able to identify this.
So yeah, the other thing that comes to my mind is just process, being able to work within an established process. I think a lot of times startups can be a little bit more loose, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Like everything, basically, like a master of all trades kind of, like like a jack of all trades kind of situation.
And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's just the environment that you need to be in. But perhaps as you've worked in that startup, you've started to put down or lay down processes, and those are things that you could talk about. That of course, we were at the beginning, it was loose, but our goal is to establish some sort of a system of the way we work. And if you can talk about those, it shows that you have an interest in being in having systems in place that allow for bigger teams to operate.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one of the things that I recommend in like interview coaching or something is basically to describe the team size and the team environment that you were working in when you describe the project. So for example, if I talk about like WebFX, Avatar, it's like, okay, I was working for the motion capture kind of layout department. It was 8 people TD team, basically. We're working often in groups of 2 or 3 people with a bunch of artists involved who were like, interacting with us because that's the support we gave basically. And with that, you can already know, okay, this is the size of the product. They worked as a TD with artists together. They worked in this kind of environment. I think that already helps you to establish. Sure. I think that is something that a lot of people kind of not mentioning, like details about the environment a little bit, like the dynamics a little bit also, like maybe you were a lead on a small, like, a 2 weeks project. I think that also is something, even if it was just 3 people, I think it's still something that you should mention to show the dynamics of how things work at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's the context, right? So that the interviewers understand how you worked. It gives them that background.
Carlos mentioned a few things about technical interviews and like answering questions basically, and he says like, oh, it's very difficult sometimes to prepare basically for this kind of question because of the variety of like, recruiters and departments and whatnot, priorities of the studio. How important do you feel like you need to be prepared for questions? And I don't mean prepared, I mean prepared for certain questions, like an exam basically. And how important do you think that? Well, like I know Jimmy, you are a big, Jimmy, you are big on preparation, and I'm also one who always says preparing is basically 50% or 70% of the interview, basically, from me. But in terms of how important would you say is important to have this like, basically like a catalog of prepared question that could happen that you are prepared to answer? How important do you feel like are this kind of level?
Why not? Like, these days with ChatGPT, you could take the job description, say, what questions would I be asked based on this job description? And then you could essentially prepare answers for those questions. There's no doubt that you can be there. But what you don't want to do is be a robot when you're answering the questions, right? So there is some concern that you're just going to ramble off something that you memorize. So it's not about that. It's just about building a catalog of stories that you can go back to. So when you do get asked questions, there's all these different challenges or problems or situations that you can go back and share in a very natural way.
You nailed it, Jimmy. Catalog of stories. It's exactly what you have, a set of examples that highlight, that are from your experiences, that highlight technical things, how you've approached them, what was the result. And don't focus so much on setting up the situation. Focus more on what you learned, even if it was, maybe you made a mistake, but what you learned from that is super, super important. And just knowing that job description inside out is really important. Everything that you've put on your resume, know what you've put on your resume, because sometimes the hiring team comes in, they have 5 minutes to look at it, and they're going to take that resume and they're going to go one line by one line asking about, oh, tell me about this. Can you give me a little bit more information? And the questions that come up will be based on your experience, what you've put on that resume. So know these past projects. Know what are those specific things that you've done. Don't lie about it. If there's someone else, they'll figure it out. If you sell yourself more and, maybe you've been on a project where someone else was the lead, someone else's idea, and you claim that, they will find out. It's very, very fast and very easy to come to the bottom of it. So be upfront about these things. and the collaboration skills also. Testing. Oh, here's the slide.
Yeah, this reminded me.
Right
Just
on my
reminded me
resume.
of this comic. Like from your resume, I can tell that you are a strong candidate, and from this interview, we conclude that you are fit for this job. You're hired. And then he says, like he thinks lying on the resume, and the recruiter, is like lying about the job description. So,
but in a more technical interview, if you don't have a test, which we don't, for example. You may expect questions about the tool itself, like, explain the difference between this and this. What is this type of node in Houdini, for example? Or how do you handle, I don't know, wind simulations? What steps would you take to debug this kind of situation? It's more to see your process, how well you know the nodes and the inside out of the tool, depending on the role again. And then if you have a test, then I find just talking to people like you guys, Sharif even in the audience, it's mostly about a real situation, something that happens in a tool that is needed in real life. It's not something, hypothetical and out of this world. It's something that is often the task. Sharif, for example, he had, I think it was NPC, you said? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
For a junior role, they made you create a turntable, right? In Maya?
Yeah, it was definitely a hard task. But even though I wasn't able to finish all of the tool in the time frame I was given, but that was expected for me from their side, that for asking this kind of specifics in a tool in a 10 days time frame, they just wanted to see how well I'll be communicating with them regarding the tool and their feedback, and did I actually read the description of the tool correctly and tried to implement it as best as I could. So they just wanted to test the procedure and the thought process more than what I'm actually trying to deliver.
Exactly. Hope this helps.
I mean, yeah, that's exactly where I was talking. And again, back to this question of like answering precise or preparing for precise question. That's exactly where I think you can become a robot if you are like, what did you? Okay, so my prepared answer for this question is A. My prepared answer for this question is B. And then you become a little bit ChatGPT answer if you have this verbatim. Mm-hmm. I mean, every one of you probably saw a presentation where someone literally either read from a script or literally memorized a script and just talk.
Yeah. Do you know what I saw? Just recently on TikTok, I saw the interview. It was on a screen. Virtual interview, and the interviewer was asking one last question. Great, are you interviewing for other jobs? And the AI tool that the interviewee was using was transcribing and giving an answer right away, and she was just reading off of it. So the question was, okay, great. We really enjoyed talking to you. And are you interviewing for other jobs? And she starts reading off that something completely off topic. She did not answer it. Oh, for this job, I think that I'm prepared. I think that I'm a good candidate because this and that. It did not fit. It was a robot. She was reading. And up until then, she had fooled the interviewer. So
my.
be very careful with these types of things.
I mean, it's a little bit like the students who copy paste the ChatGPT like last message, like, you know, this was generated by an AI and they put it into their homework and then just like submit it, and they forgot to remove the last piece of the sentence, basically. No, but yeah, so I think what Jimmy said, I think that's also something that I always advise. He called it like stories. I call it like mini presentations. Basically, so you should have been everything relevant to the role. You should be ready to mini present. Like, for example, I worked on an open source pipeline Plex. I can make a mini monologue of 5 minutes, a maximum or whatever, about open source pipeline Plex. I can monologue about Avatar. I can monologue about my work at Weta. I can monologue about my work at the podcast. I can monologue about my general introduction. So it's basically like in my head, I have like 20 to 30 mini presentations that I can just like a little bit adjust depending on the question, obviously, but that I can like just like repeat in my own words. Like, it's not like purely 100%, but it's like I practice it enough so my mind will put the pieces together when I need them, basically. And I think that is the best way to approach that. Not like remembering 100% the question, but more like you practice all the presentations that you usually need. Like, who are you? You know, what did you do at this company? What did you do on that project? This kind of things. And then you basically prepared. And then if someone asks you the question, you are ready to, you know, give your presentation about like that you thought about, that you can put pieces together. And you also have enough mind to improvise, because there is some automatic things going on because you prepared. So you can still adjust it a little bit if you feel like, oh, I should mention Python a little bit more often in this part because it is about this role, basically. So that's how I see it, like, kind of. It's like telling a story, but basically more as not as a script, but more as a like live presentation. Hey guys, like you have a slideshow in the background and you're like, so when I was at Weta, I was working on this project with like 8 people and I was focused on that part and Python was my main language and blah, 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 basically. So that's how I see it more than like verbatim answering question, like literally having this the 100 most asked interview question kind of. I'm not a big fan of that, basically.
On that note, can I highlight a couple of things that I think are really important? First one is, do not underestimate that first, like, tell me about yourself, or walk us through, tell us about who you are, or walk us through your experience. That first like intro in the interview, that one is so important. So it's like an elevated pitch, like two minutes, but go into who you are. Don't give random details, and to kind of show a little bit of personality there. And then it's okay to ask your recruiter what the format of the interview is. Is this going to be, who is going to be in the interview? If they don't share their names or their roles, it's important to know who your audience is. And it's important to know what the format is, what's going to happen, how long is it going to be. All of these things, your recruiter should be able to tell you if they haven't yet. I don't know how many times people have just an initial kind of a one-on-one call with the recruiter before the interview. That call is very important as well. Don't bomb it. Don't underestimate it, because it's going to help you prepare for that important interview with the hiring managers. You can ask questions about the steps, like how many interviews do you have, what the format is going to be, how long they're going to be, next steps, even like wrapping up the call. If you don't know already, make sure you ask what are the next steps right after interviews closing up.
Yeah, but basically it comes back to the presentation element that you're prepared to have this like mini talk. Hey, my name is Alexander, and I'm a technical director for visual effects, and I worked and stuff like that. So it's like this like mini presentation that you do in the beginning, and that you should adjust to the role. So it's not just the same every time, but it's maybe like highlighting certain things at this role and highlighting certain things at that role, and maybe ignoring a few things that are not important for certain roles, basically. And I think that is something that a lot of people are not preparing. I feel like in the beginning, they just wing it mostly, and you can hear it, I feel like, a lot of times.
100%, you can. It's really obvious when someone has prepared that very first like opening, hey everyone, just knowing people's names, knowing the pace is good. There's no ums and like. The flow is better. There's a smile. All of these things matter. Jimmy, what are your thoughts on giving interview questions ahead of time to the interviewees prepare?
I mean, here's the thing, right? This is the way it should be. And I don't know about maybe some hiring managers might, but the purpose is not to try and trick anyone, right? That's so I don't have a problem giving the questions to people in advance. In fact, one of my interviewers, one of my interviewers for an artist role, he asked the exact same questions for every artist. So in some ways, someone could have copied all those questions down and shared them with everybody. And like he even says up front, we ask the same questions to everyone. And he's very, very open about that. Because the purpose of the question is not to try and trick someone to prove that they're not a good fit. That's not what we're trying to do, to prove that someone is not a good fit. So I don't have an issue. It really depends on how prepared the supervisors are with having those questions in advance to share. But it shouldn't. They're not. We're not trying to hide anything.
I see it a little bit from the podcasting side, because I'm a little bit have the same thing on if I do a podcast, because I have the same question. Basically, should I give the person who is joining me on the podcast all the questions beforehand? And and for me, it's about dynamic. So there is a danger if I give the guests all the questions from the beginning. They will some will not, but some will pure prepare, and they come with this kind of mindset of a certain story that they want to tell because they know the questions beforehand, and so they will come into this. They come with a little bit of an HR mentality of like everything is already sanitized and prepared, and kind of like the most PG version of whatever they can bring up, basically. And I think from my perspective, what I like. I share the first question. I shared the first question also with you, basically, and because I think it's important to give this like running, like the motor and the mouth kind of getting into them, like so you have the opportunity to at least prepare the first question. Like the most common first question is always like introduce yourself, or can you introduce yourself, or something like that. I think that's the most common thing ever. But I think the surprise gives a certain amount of dynamic, kind of like, so I feel like there are like some questions or basic ideas. I think that's totally fine to share. But I think if you would share every question and you will literally go in the interview throughout the question, I think there's a big chance that you find people, they're just schooling their way through the question, and then they become a little bit dull and boring and a little bit too sanitized, also like fake, if you want to call it like that. And so I think like, it's not, again, as you say, it's not about tricking. It's more about authenticity.
Yeah.
By at least like not sharing all the question, but at the same time sharing maybe the first question, so they feel like, more like comfortable with getting into the thing, because that's also important thing in podcasting or whatever or in a conversation like this is like getting the person into the conversation. Like they feel comfortable. They're like the adrenaline is going, like they're in that, like basically, and now you can dive into things, basically. So we are all basically on the same level. But in terms of dynamic or authenticity, I think it's often there are certain benefits of surprising someone, not in a negative way, just more in a like think about it. Here's a question that you need to figure out. Like, and again, the best podcast that I had where I asked a question that the other person was completely flabbergasted. I remember one episode with Eugenie von Tutzelmann. We talked about the black hole from Interstellar. And I looked at her personal work of machine learning, where she had this like figure like running around. So I literally dived into her like, you know, sub links and stuff like that. And I was like, hey, can you tell us about this machine learning project that you? And she was like completely surprised. But it changed the dynamic, because she was like, you know, it was a compliment, because, you know, someone looked at that stuff. She talked about her passion at the same time. There was no preparation because it was surprising. And it also, like, to some degree, opened the ending part of the conversation to some degree, because it has this like mix of emotions. So I feel like there's a lot of benefit of not negatively, but surprise someone basically, or challenge someone, let's say it this way, basically.
I think this takes us back to this original idea that we have these ideas prepared in our head. So it really ultimately doesn't matter what the question is, right? Because the stories are already there that we can pull from.
like the candidate is like, okay, I'm ignoring whatever you just asked, Jimmy. I will just answer whatever I just think I want to answer now. Like, I'm already prepared. I prepared this conversation already, so you don't need to ask me any questions. Here's my life story, basically. Let's quickly jump to a few of the questions that if we talk about that. So Anjali asked, technical roles can vary significantly from one studio to another, with each having its own expectations for technical artists. For instance, when hiring a technical animator, what qualities and skills do you look for in a candidate?
Jimmy's hiring for a technical animator.
Now that is a funny one too, because even the title technical animator, Eva and I were talking about this the other day, can mean different things. I think at MPC it's a CFX artist. In games, I think it associates more with rigging. So it all comes down to this job description. That's ultimately, it doesn't matter what the title is. People will call it whatever they want to call it, but the job description is going to give you the secrets to what we're looking for. Yeah, right now we're looking to hire a technical, call it a technical animator, call it a technical assistant in the animation department. Regardless, it's there to support the animation team and troubleshoot, so that the animators can focus on the craft of animation and not worry about getting stuck in their shots and such. So.
And Jimmy did a wonderful job, you guys, just wording that job description to not sound robotic. I don't know if you've gone to our careers page and looked at it, but there's the main objectives. It's very clear what's going to be expected for that role. And then you have your responsibilities, and they're very clear, and there's not much fluff around it. It's super straightforward. So I think our team, at least, has put in a lot of time into those job descriptions. So what Jimmy was saying about taking that, putting it into ChatGPT, and getting it to do a mock interview with you based on that job description, you can do that. Use it. It's not just a robotic cheating tool. You can use it to, what are you doing, Jimmy? Learning Japanese? You're speaking with the computer. Use it as a training buddy.
Yeah, and I think also like the general, like, because I'm currently using ChatGPT and Copilot for coding, for example, and I think the same experience as I had as using it for anything else, text or whatever. It is. I see a glimpse of support in there, but I also see horrible disaster coming your way if you over rely on it, basically. So it literally broke my code, and it literally fake broke my code, which means it worked, but then it broke. and you don't notice it instantly. And I think the same problem you get sometimes with results in terms of answers. They sound good, like TikTok answers. I think, Iva, we talked about the TikTok answers from like TikTok tutorials of how to answer best question or whatever. And ChatGPT has a little bit of this as well. There's a lot of answers that ChatGPT or whoever you use gives, and that applies for coding, text, and whatever, images as well, that they look good or sound good on the surface, but when it comes to the perception of who's experienced, like an experienced recruiter, an experienced supervisor, an experienced coder on the other side, they will see right through this bullshit, and they will like, nope. It sounds good. It sounds good on TV. It sounds good on an app, or sounds good for you as a beginner, applying for a job, because it sounds, powerful and, like a music lyrics kind of sentence or whatever. But then for the other person, it's like, it's empty. There's no content that you just described. Basically, your whole 5 sentences of answering this question were just buzzwords, for example. And I think that is the biggest danger with the whole AI thing, where I feel like there is certain inspiration that you can get and certain, oh yeah, this is better than what I thought kind of situations. But I think if you rely too heavily on it, besides all the examples that we just mentioned of, shutting your brain off and just reading what ChatGPT gives you back, basically that is a big danger. But also the big danger is that you misunderstand your actual level, because ChatGPT is always is pushing up your level a little bit higher, but it will always be in the like kind of environment of where you actually are. So in coding, the same. If you don't understand what ChatGPT is doing, basically, because you just give me answer, you will end up like over time with complete disaster of a building of code, basically. And I think that is the same thing in your interview. If you don't understand why ChatGPT gives you these answers and whatever, it basically you repeat them, but you don't understand the other side, what they want, what is actually something that they feel valuable and not buzzwordy. And I think that there is this thing where I feel like use things like AI. I think that also in coding and whatever, but use them only as a support. Never use them as a crutch or replacement for lack of education skills or whatever. Because if you do it, you maybe see a few jumps in the beginning, like, oh yeah, things working. Hey, I fixed the code by using ChatGPT. Oh, I got the answers right. And then suddenly it doesn't. And the problem also, and I think that is the biggest thing with things like ChatGPT. ChatGPT is always confident. Whatever you ask an AI, they always say, "This is the answer, buddy. This is the best thing ever. This is like you. Oh, I have a problem. Here is the code. Here's the solution." And then you're like, "Oh, cool. It's very confident. Okay, let me use it." But because there is no hesitation, and current AI models don't say, "Hey, I'm not sure about this, but this is probably the solution," because like they cannot judge the quality of something. They always say, this is the best thing under the sun since 500 years, basically. So if you do this, you will be the thing. So I think that is the big danger at the moment with things like AI or something like that.
Jimmy and I used it to ask opinion. Is this ethical? What do you think? Could this be perceived as unethical? And just wanted to see what the machine would say.
So would you murder your colleague if the studio will say so? And you're like, is this okay? And ChatGPT, absolutely fine. Like, this is like, give more holidays and they're fine. Okay, what is okay, now I want to know, what is a question where you would ask if it's ethical? Like, I'm a little bit surprised about what a recruiter will see is like an unethical question.
Well, that's a side conversation we can have another time.
Okay. Okay, so we have a few other questions. So Tushar, hi. So I have over 12 years of experience in rigging and technical artists, but most of my experience is in feature films or CG series. So now whenever I try to move into game or visual effects, it's getting very hard. Like the response on my application and sometime at the time of the interview. So there's no question, but the question is probably, is there anything, how can I transition from feature films and CG series to games and visual effects?
I mean, sometimes that's just a market situation as well. Like if you're competing with people who have the VFX or game experience, it's going to be more challenging to make that transition in a tighter market. Certainly, hiring managers are more open to people outside of that specific realm. So it could just be a market thing. The other part is are you, like, if you're looking to get into games, how are you demonstrating your passion for games? Like, do you look like a person that has interest in working in the gaming industry, or do you just look like a person who has experience in series animation? So that's the other thing that people are looking for is the passion for that part of the industry.
Believe it or not, just before Iva will answer, I believe it or not, I had a coaching for a video game interview, and I had a final question as an interviewer that I didn't thought will mean anything, but literally destroyed the whole interview. I asked, so we did the fake application for Blizzard, so I was the Blizzard recruiter basically, and so my question was, and it was a throwaway question: what is your favorite Blizzard game? And the answer was, I don't like video games. and I was like, and until that, I would say it was like a 50-50 situation kind of, but that was like, I never even thought about it. I was just, it's like, it's like how you doing question, I feel like, basically. Because you will think if someone applies for Blizzard or something, then they have some passion for that. And I think to some degree, this high level Pixar's and Disney's and whatever, they expect you to be obsessed a little bit with that. Like, like maybe some company around the corner, maybe they don't care as much. They want good worker and whatever. But I think the big one who have the selection, they want you to be like, I'm playing, like, I brought all my Blizzard games here. Like, I have the package still. I actually have somewhere flying around here. So basically, I think that's the like, sometimes this can end up also like, maybe also make sure that you are passionate about the thing that you want to apply, not just theoretically, but also, like you are interested in that, like as a consumer, maybe basically to some degree, like at least on that level, let's say this way, basically.
And that can come off, in your cover letter, perhaps you're talking about your passion and interest in that area. It could come off with, I don't know, maybe a personal tool that you built for someone in the gaming industry. Maybe it's just talking about how you're learning Unreal or Unity, which maybe is more common in the gaming side. So there's different ways you can showcase that interest on your resume and cover letter, but the interest needs to be there, because again, otherwise someone else's interest is going to stand out more than you.
Yeah, the gaming industry is interesting. It's like a community. There's camaraderie, I find.
Totally.
And we had at my old studio a gaming division, and they always asked, so what do you play nowadays? It's like a given, not if you play, it's what you play. And now is different than a year ago. Are you up to speed with, what's new, what's hip? Have you tried it? Even if you're not a gamer, do you know what they're talking about? I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, personal projects is one way. I think personal projects is something that in any of these industries is super important to have as like part of your reel or website or whatever, just showing your passion, what it comes down to.
Awesome. I think we have also a really cool question for technical things. So I don't have a name, so I have to. I was wondering about your perspective about two things. How important is having published code on platforms like GitHub for technical roles? And how much of a boost does having strong references provide during the interview process? So let's start with GitHub code published online. how important it is for a technical role that has coding as part of their, or like, I think worse is probably like sending like, some zip file in the email or something like that. I think that probably will be the alternative, basically.
Pipeline roles, technical roles, a link of any sort is not expected. It's extra. It's nice to have if you have a Git page just to see how clean your code is, how you structure things, what types of tools that you can share that you maybe as a personal passion project you're working on. That's helpful. But I feel like it's always secondary. It's not the first thing that hiring managers in those roles look for. If you don't have one, you're not less likely to get an interview. So,
yeah, and if I may add, similar to an artist reel, if your code is from 2019, that's not very helpful either. So if you're gonna share a GitHub page, it should have code that's recent.
I mean, that's one of the things that I actually like when we do the master classes in Python, because most people who join me, they are not learning Python for Python's sake. They learn Python for technical artists, technical director. They want to use Python as a skill to advance to a technical role, basically. Yep. And so one of the things that are different to like Udemy's is, for me, is like I want them to create a final tool at the end. I want them to do a presentation where they present to the group, hey, this is what I did, explain it, so they learn a little bit expressing. And I want them to create a video at the end so they can like share it online and show like in Maya, they they use the tool and something happens. I usually say I want the pop-up effect. I want nothing, use the tool, suddenly the world is there, basically, in 7 days. So I think that is always the thing. And I always, for me, I personally always encourage you, the more public your code is, like on GitHub, for example, and there's a video maybe of at least from your tool showing how it works, the more likely it feels more professional. It just feels more settled. Where if someone just has no public code, no public like online video tool of their tools, and they just send me a zip file of their code in their application, I feel I don't know. I feel like for me, it's a more of a state of, like establishment.
I think we're talking about two different things here, right? Like, for example, are these, if there's people who are looking to transition into a TD role, or maybe they're new to the industry versus somebody who's been in a TD role for 5, 6, 7 years, right? Mm-hmm. If they don't have a GitHub page, but they've worked at these established VFX or animation studios, I'm not going to expect a GitHub from them. I know that they've got that established experience. But if, for example, you're new to the industry or you're making that switch from an artist, I think certainly that's going to be an advantage to you, because how else are you going to demonstrate it, right? You want to get that leg up. You want to demonstrate all that you can. And whatever tools that you have, one being the GitHub, that's great. Throw it all out there and see what sticks to make your life easier.
Yeah, because also at the end of the day, if you have a GitHub account, it also means you understand Git, which also answers a question that maybe you have, basically. So that's what I mean. Like if you can answer questions by making a video, by answering questions like how useful is your stuff, and second, you can answer questions by how do you document, how is your code, do you know Git, do you know this, do you know that? Like literally, I can open someone's GitHub account. I know they know Git, I know they know PEP, I know they know this, I know that. Basically, where everything else is a little bit like if they send me a zip file or something, I don't know if they can know Git or not. So that's a question. So I feel like that's, if you can, I mean, I understand totally. And it's basically coming back to what we talked in the beginning. You ask question about the things you are unsure about. Like if you know they have experience, you don't need to double, throw and give me more Git, give me more code. I know that you did it, but give me more. But yeah, I think in generally it's still, like if that's maybe not clear, I think that's the perfect answer. Then having like something like your code on Git, you answer 5 questions at the same time versus like a zip file that you send as an attachment to your application, basically.
And sometimes companies don't allow opening these kinds of files. There's security measures, and then there's the shared personal drive links. Those don't open.
Yeah.
So my advice is, if you're sharing anything, make it in a video format and have an unlisted link if it's not entirely supposed to be there. Make an unlisted link or password protected link, but don't share personal drive links or files. Those don't open always.
I would agree.
Awesome. Then let's wrap it up for a final question here. And here, as from VFX Kitchen, a good friend of mine, I'm curious about the challenges of securing a remote job with a studio in Canada or the US while based in Europe. I understand the complexity around tax credits, but it seems that places like London and Germany, which were once strong contenders, now have fewer opportunities. Would that change?
Again, I think that comes down to the market. If there are local candidates available, studios are going to hire local candidates. It just makes it's easier for studios. But as things pick up again, then it certainly does give more opportunity for companies to outsource those things. It's unfortunately just a state of where we're at in the industry. But I think companies always want to hire the best and most talented people in order to build up their pipeline, particularly in this case, building tools and such. So they're certainly open to it, but the way that the market is right now, if there's an available talent locally, that's going to be a preference.
Yeah, and maybe in that case, sometimes it's about the timing of things, and if you have a strong recommendation within the company, that may be a way to override the whole local need, because someone vouches for you and knows your skills, and maybe it's always going to be, at least for us, not an employee type of setup. It's an independent contractor type of setup. If you don't have any connections, then I would recommend going on Fiverr or any of these types of places where you can contract for specific tasks and building connections that way. I've seen these types of relationships grow. Once you get to know what you can do, how you fit in with that team, flourish to something more. But yeah, it's tough.
I mean, I also saw that I think that it's really interesting that you can just use the relationships that you have, but you also can create. And I think LinkedIn, for example, is something that can allow you to, for example, if you're interested, let's say you want to go to Bardel and you want to work as a lighting artist, whatever, you just reach out to the lighting lead maybe and like, hey, I'm interested in that role, for example, and just ask them some realistic question, not bullshitting some blah blah, but really like, hey, what does that mean to work like in that role, or for the recruiter or whatever? Just a way of like personalize, and sometimes like just showing interest, and maybe also trying to learn, like hey, what do you need? What are the things that is there some technology that I can look into, or what software do you use? Maybe if that's not clear for some reason, basically, sometimes it's not, I don't know. So basically, I think, and I had a situation where I literally reached out to a few leads in the studio, and I ended up traveling to that country a little bit half on holiday, and then meeting that lead basically then like locally, like a little bit as a buddy. And created like to some degree an opportunity like of an open door to like, he can at least recommend me to some degree. And I think there is like you can create this if you don't have them, as long as you reach out and are nice and friendly and have genuine question, not just stupid things that you can Google yourself, basically. I think that you can also create this kind of relationship. You don't need to, have them, because you wear certain environments or schools or whatever. Basically, I think there is some chance. And I mean, a compliment goes a long way generally in this kind of situations anyway. Like if someone sees you two here basically, and they reach out to you and says, hey, thank you very much for your, event. That was really helpful. I had a follow-up question to that. I think that already gives like a few points basically, I think.
Oh, totally. I mean, you should always be building your network, and certainly be patient with people. I think there's a lot of chatter going on social media right now, again, because of the market. So response time might be slower, let's just say.
We get a lot of messages.
But
Awesome.
I certainly try and get back to everyone as best I can.
Okay, let's wrap up this. So first thing, I wanted to again recommend you guys this video we did on the 21 Artist Show with Jimmy Ockley, where we talked about applying for studios like Animal, for example, but in general also seeing the perspective of what recruiters see. So this is a great additional piece to what we just did. We also did some with Nick Hoare, where we basically got all Animal basically in our situation here. We talked about we added, this is basically in addition to what we talked with Jimmy. Nick answered questions that we didn't cover with Jimmy. And then we talked with Steve, also from Animal, and there we talked about the technical side. So he is a lighting supervisor for the technical roles, and we talked about what the lighting TD and similar roles do. We also talked about the interview process of what he's looking for, what's important for him, and so on and so forth. And if you're interested, besides using ChatGPT and you need some personal things, you're welcome to join my coaching. I have a coaching program on my website, and I'm currently working on an interview masterclass. So if you're interested, you can sign up for it and wishlist it, and then you get a notification, basically. And if you're interested to see more TD meetups, which we'll do every month, you can sign up for the newsletter, you get a notification, and then you are connected, and you know exactly when the next, in January, which will be Nuke. We will talk about multi-shot from Nuke. It's a new feature there. But yeah, we do that every month. It will be every month. It's a little bit different topics, and we try new things, basically.
Nice.
And that's basically it from us. Any final words from you guys? To any final wisdom for the people trying to make it?
Keep at it. Like interviewing it's a skill, right? And the more you practice, the more comfortable you are. So mock interviews is a great way to do it. Team up with somebody that and just practice at it. Just getting comfortable talking about your experiences.
100%. There's somewhere on the internet a TED talk about public speaking and overcoming, that nervousness, the nervousness that takes over your whole body. It's very powerful, and you need to 100% practice until that becomes you. Lean into the nervousness. Use oxygen is a huge tool in your interview toolkit, and maybe humor. Don't be afraid to show personality. But preparation is I'd say more than half of the battle.
Yep.
Yes, I think that's also what Jimmy and I always said. Like, it's you should always be prepared. And I think, Jimmy, you mentioned a lot of times, like, just read and remember the basics of the job application. I think that already will save you a lot of pain. Like, because again, there are situations like, for example, if one of the key elements is like Maya and Python or whatever, and then you mention more often the words Maya and Python in your answers, like, I worked on this project and I used Maya. I worked on that project, I used Python. I think it just sticks more out that you're like, hey, he was using that thing there and here and there. And like, again, I always say it's a little bit about buzzwords to some degree, because also your resume should always reflect the job application. So you should usually have the same, if you can, the same role of the job application in your resume as the title. You know, it's not something, because sometimes it's very confusing for some people that, like, oh, there's someone who is they're looking for a pipeline technical director and your role is software developer. Is that the same? Can you do the job? Can you not do the job? The other person maybe doesn't know. They're not experts in everything. And I think the same thing applies for the rest. Like by remembering things, preparing presentations, you're able to fulfill the need of the other side. And that's about what it is at the end of the day. It's to make the other side comfortable with you in both sense, in skill and personality. And the more you kind of understand the other side, the more you can prepare something that to make sure that you arrive at what they need, and not just they need to get it out of you and figure out if they can trust you in skill and teamwork, basically, at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Jimmy, Iva, thank you very much for joining, and everyone else also for joining us today. This was a little bit different than usually, but I wanted to try a little bit more of a panel because it's called TT Meetup. So I wanted to make it more of a meetup, less of a workshop. Let's see how we do it in the future, but we try different things to see how it goes. And yeah, guys, if you can find us also on LinkedIn. You can connect with us, especially with the two. If you want to, for example, apply for Bardel, for example, you can reach out to this too and tell them your life story and your struggles and skills and whatever, basically. And no, it was really, thank you very much, guys, that you had the time and give us the opportunity to dive deeper into interviews, but also into how this looks like in a technical sense, basically.
And thank you for putting this together, Alex.
Yeah, Alex, keep doing what you're doing. It's great. I love your commitment, and you guys are very lucky to have someone like Alex.
I welcome you to join us live and also watch the previous episodes, and I'll see you on our next TT Meetup.